It's funny, the things people decide are weird, isn't it? For my sister Carol, it was the fact that my 11-year-old son Leo didn't have a favorite YouTuber. For the other parents in our cul-de-sac, it was his lack of interest in soccer or video games. For them, Leo's quiet, all-consuming passion was a puzzle, a social deficiency to be solved. They called his obsession with old maps weird. I just called it Leo being Leo. Right now, he was at the dining room table, the epicenter of his strange, paper-based world. He wasn't staring at a screen, but at a sprawling, sepia-toned chart of our county from 1902. His small finger, smudged with what was probably graphite and the dust of a forgotten century, traced a faint, spidery line. It wasn't just a hobby, it was a form of communion. He would spend hours like this, lost in the delicate calligraphy of a long-dead cartographer, murmuring the forgotten names of creeks and settlements like he was reciting a prayer. "Look, Mom," he'd said earlier, his voice hushed with reverence. "This whole area used to be called Whispering Pines, not Oak Ridge Estates. And this road, it's not on our map." I defended it, always. When Carol suggested he needed to get outside more, I'd bite back the urge to tell her he understood the outside world on a deeper level than anyone I knew. I bought him his first real antique map for his 10th birthday, a topographical survey of the very hills our house was nestled in. The look on his face wasn't the fleeting joy of a kid opening a new toy. It was the profound awe of a scholar finding a lost text. In a world of fleeting digital distractions, my son had found something tangible, something real. He was learning about history, about shifting landscapes, about how the world beneath our feet is a living document. I saw it as his unique language, a way of seeing through time, and I would never let anyone shame him for his fluency. I walked to the kitchen window with my coffee, my gaze drifting past Leo's bent head to the familiar panorama of Golden Hills. It was late August, and the heat was a physical presence, pressing down on the landscape until it seemed to shimmer and warp. A hot, dry Santa Ana wind had been blowing for 3 days, rattling the windows and carrying the scent of dust and baked manzanita. It was the kind of weather that put a knot in the pit of your stomach, a low, primal hum of anxiety that every Californian understands. I could see a faint brownish haze staining the otherwise perfect blue sky to the east, and I told myself it was just smog, just the usual atmospheric grit. But the wind carries something else, too, a faint, acrid smell like a distant campfire that wouldn't quite go out. It was a smell that made the hair on my arms stand up, a scent that whispered of brittle leaves and the terrible, explosive potential of a single spark. I turned from the window, forcing a casualness I didn't feel. "Hey, Leo, you want some juice?" My voice sounded thin against the rattling hum of the wind. He didn't look up, just gave a little shake of his head, his fingers still glued to that spidery line. On the cool tile by the back door, our old golden retriever, Buddy, let out a low groan in his sleep. He was 14, stiff-jointed and mostly deaf, a gentle, wheezing fixture of our home. My heart gave a familiar pang. Getting him into the car was an ordeal on a good day. The thought of rushing him was a problem I didn't want to contemplate. That's when my phone, sitting on the counter, let out a piercing electronic shriek. It wasn't my ringtone. It was the alien screech of a government alert, a sound designed to cut through sleep, conversation, and denial. Both Leo and I jumped. Buddy's head lifted, his old eyes confused. I snatched the phone. The message was stark, all caps, a digital shout, wildfire warning, mandatory evacuation for Oak Ridge Estates and surrounding areas. My blood went cold. At the same moment, as if the world was conspiring for maximum dramatic effect, the lights flickered and died. The hum of the refrigerator, the air conditioning, the low thrum of the house, all gone. All that was left was the rising howl of the Santa Ana wind and the frantic thumping of my own heart. I ran to the front door and threw it open. The smell hit me first, a physical blow. It wasn't a distant campfire anymore. It was the smell of a world on fire. The air was thick with it, hot and choking. And the sky to the east was gone. In its place was a monstrous, churning cloud of black and gray smoke, lit from within by a terrifying, pulsing orange glow. It was moving, boiling toward us, so much faster than I could have imagined. Ash, like gray, greasy snowflakes, was already starting to settle on the car, on the parched lawn, in my hair. The knot of anxiety in my stomach tightened into pure cold terror. This is it. This is how it happens. You see it on the news, you feel sorry for those poor people, and you never ever think it will be you, standing on your own front porch, watching the apocalypse roll in. Before I go on, before I tell you what happened next in that chaos, I just want to take a second. If you're finding your way to this story, and if you're connecting with it, please consider hitting that like button. And if you want to hear how it all ends, how a boy and his maps face down a monster, maybe subscribe to the channel. It lets me know these stories are finding a home. Okay, I slammed the door shut, my mind a frantic mess of lists. The dog, the car, the go bag I'd never actually packed, my wallet, Leo. My eyes darted to the dining room table. He was still there, but his posture had changed. He wasn't dreamily tracing the past anymore. He was on his knees on the chair, leaning over the 1902 map with a fierce, focused intensity. His gaze flicked from the paper to the window, to the horrifying sky, and back again. There was no panic on his face, only a terrifyingly calm, sharp-edged calculation. He was connecting the dots, seeing something I couldn't. "Mom," he said, his voice quiet but clear over the wind. "The traffic's gonna go to the freeway. Everyone will." He pointed a determined, graphite-smudged finger at the map. But that's not the only way out. For a split second, my terror-scrambled brain couldn't process his words. He was talking about a map, a 100-year-old piece of paper, while the world was ending outside our window. "Leo, stop," I snapped, the words sharp with panic. "There's no time for games. We have to go. Now." I grabbed my purse from the hook by the door, fumbling for the car keys inside. My fingers felt like clumsy sausages. "It's not a game," he insisted, his voice rising not with fear but with an urgent frustration. He was still pointing. "They'll all go down Oak Ridge Drive to the 15. It's the only big road. It's gonna be a parking lot. We'll be trapped." "It's the evacuation route, Leo. It's the way out," I shouted, my voice cracking. I could already hear the sounds from outside, a growing chorus of car engines revving, doors slamming, people yelling. The chaos was starting. "Buddy, come on, boy," I called, trying to coax the confused old dog to his feet. He whimpered, struggling to rise on his arthritic hips. Every second felt like an eternity. I glanced out the front bay window, and my heart seized. Leo was right, headlights crisscrossed in the smoky gloom of our cul-de-sac. My neighbor, Mr. Henderson, the one who'd once jovially called Leo Professor Dusty at a block party, was trying to back his massive SUV out of his driveway, nearly clipping the Garza's minivan as they tried to do the same. It was a symphony of panic, a gridlock of fear before they even reached the main road. We'd be stuck right here, 100 feet from our own front door. And then it happened. It wasn't a slow advance. It was a violent, predatory leap. A gust of wind, stronger than the rest, roared like a freight train. It carried with it a swirling vortex of glowing red embers, a blizzard from hell. I watched, frozen in horror, as the storm of sparks descended on the Hendersons, perfectly manicured, bone-dry landscaping. The ornamental cypress trees by their driveway didn't just catch fire, they vaporized. One moment they were there, the next they were incandescent skeletons, exploding into a fountain of fire that rained down on the roof of their house. A deafening whoomph shook our home, rattling the windows in their frames. The Hendersons, garage door buckled outwards as their cars, their home, their entire world was consumed in a single monstrous gulp of flame. The fire wasn't moving toward us anymore. It was here. It had jumped the road, It had cut off our exit. The way out was gone, replaced by a wall of fire. The sight broke something in me. The frantic, list-making part of my brain shut down, and the animal terror took over. A scream clawed its way up my throat, but no sound came out. We were trapped. We were going to die here, in this house, watching our neighbors' lives turn to ash. My mind was a white-hot blank. Then, through the roaring in my ears, I heard Leo's voice again, sharp and certain. "Mom, the Whispering Pines Road. It's still there. I know it is." I turned from the window, from the horrifying vision of the fire devouring our street. I looked at my son. He was standing now, the old map clutched in his hands like a sacred text. The terrifying calm was still on his face, but his eyes were pleading with me, begging me to listen, to trust him. And in that moment, seeing the absolute certainty in his gaze, the panic in my chest finally receded, replaced by a single, sharp point of focus. The YouTubers, the soccer games, the judgment of other parents, it all burned away. None of it had ever mattered. This was what mattered. His weird, beautiful, obsessive mind. It wasn't a social deficiency. It was our only hope. "Show me," I said, my voice a raw whisper. "Show me the way." He didn't hesitate. He scrambled to the center of the living room, away from the hellish light of the windows, and unfurled the map on the floor. Buddy, startled by the sudden movement, whined and tried to press himself flatter against the tiles. The paper, a century old, seemed to absorb the apocalyptic orange glow pulsing through the house. The roaring outside was a constant, a physical pressure on my eardrums, punctuated by sickening cracks and pops as the fire consumed everything familiar. "Here," Leo said, his finger jabbing the map with unnerving precision. "See? It's labeled Pine Mill Road. It was a service road for the old lumber mill in the canyon. It cuts behind the hills, east of the reservoir, and comes out way down on the old highway." He looked up at me, his eyes wide and serious in the flickering light. "It's not paved, Mom. It's probably just dirt, but it goes away from the fire." My hand was already shaking as I pulled my phone from my pocket. A part of my brain, the logical adult part that still believed in systems and order, refused to accept this. A dirt road from 1902 was not a plan. It was a fantasy. "We need to call 911, Leo," I said, my voice tight. "They'll have an emergency route. They'll tell us what to do." My thumb smeared ash across the screen as I swiped and dialed. The screen glowed with the call attempt. 1 ring, 2. A click, then a recorded message, a calm female voice telling me all operators were busy due to the current emergency. The juxtaposition of her serene, corporate tone and the sound of the world ending was so grotesque I almost choked. I waited, listening to the tinny-holed music battle the roar of the fire. Finally, a real voice, frayed and exhausted. 911, what is your emergency? I blurted it all out. Oak Ridge Estates, the cul-de-sac, the fire jumping the road, the Hendersons, house exploding, the evacuation route being a wall of flame. "We're trapped," I yelled into the phone, my voice shredding. "The main route is gone. We need another way out." There was a pause, a faint rustle of papers on the other end. "Ma'am," the voice said, flat and worn thin. "The designated evacuation route for your area is Oak Ridge Drive south to the I-15. Please proceed to that route. Units are responding to the area." "You don't understand," I screamed, tears of pure frustration finally breaking free. "I am looking at it. It is on fire. We cannot get there." "Ma'am, I have no other routes on my system." "That is the official route," the dispatcher repeated, her voice turning clipped and impatient, as if I were a child refusing to follow simple instructions. "If you cannot safely evacuate, you need to shelter in place. Move to the center of your home, away from windows, and await instructions from emergency personnel." Shelter in place? In a wooden house with the fire already devouring our street? Before I could argue, before I could beg her to understand that her official plan was a death sentence, The line went dead. I stared at the black screen of the phone. Await instructions. This system, the safety net I'd always implicitly trusted, the entire world of adults who were supposed to have the answers, had just told me to sit here and burn. The authorities weren't coming with a secret plan. We were an anomaly their script couldn't account for, an acceptable loss. The feeling wasn't just fear, it was a profound, chilling abandonment. My gaze lifted from the useless piece of plastic in my hand to my son. He was still kneeling by the map, his face a mask of concentration in the terrible light, waiting. He hadn't expected them to help. He had known all along we were on our own. And the only person in the entire world who had a map to a different future was my weird, wonderful boy. I dropped the phone. It clattered on the tile, a useless black rectangle. The world had shrunk to the four walls of this room, the roaring of the fire, and the steady gaze of my son. He was the only authority left, the only plan. Okay, I breathed, the word tasting of smoke and surrender. Okay, Leo, your way. As if in answer, the large picture window in the living room, the one that looked out onto the cul-de-sac, gave a sharp, sickening crack. A spiderweb of fractures bloomed across the glass, and then the entire pane imploded inward with a percussive blast of superheated air. The sound was deafening, a physical blow that sent me stumbling back. The fire wasn't on the street anymore. It was a living entity clawing its way into our home. A torrent of black smoke and glowing red embers poured into the room, a river of destruction. The orange light that had been pulsing outside was now inside, strobing across our faces, painting the walls in the colors of hell. The Santa Ana wind howled through the new opening, a malevolent gale that snatched at the curtains, whipping them like frantic ghosts. One of the embers, a vicious little spark, landed on the sheer fabric. It didn't smolder, it ignited. A line of fire shot up the curtain with terrifying speed. The smoke detector, a moment too late, began to shriek its useless, high-pitched alarm. The smell of burning polyester filled the air, acrid and gag-inducing. This was it. The fire was in the house. The dispatcher's words, "Shelter in place," echoed in my mind as a cruel, murderous joke. Primal instinct took over. I ripped the decorative throw blanket off the armchair and lunged, beating at the flames with frantic, clumsy slaps. The synthetic fabric of the blanket began to melt and stick to the burning curtain, the smell growing worse. I coughed, my lungs burning, my eyes streaming. Buddy was barking now, a frantic, terrified sound he hadn't made in years. "The back door, Mom?" Leo yelled, his voice cutting through my panic. "We have to go out the back, the garage!" I beat the last of the flames out, leaving a blackened, smoldering scar on the wall. The room was thick with smoke, hot and suffocating. My home was no longer a sanctuary. It was a tomb in the making. I dropped the ruined blanket and scrambled toward Buddy, grabbing his collar. He resisted, digging his paws in, his old body trembling with fear at the chaos. "Come on, boy, please," I begged, pulling with all my strength. Leo was already at the kitchen door that led to the garage, the map clutched in one hand. He wasn't looking at the fire anymore. He was looking at me, his expression unwavering. He had given me the path. It was my job to get us there. With a final, desperate heave, I half-dragged, half-lifted Buddy's hindquarters, forcing the whimpering old dog into a stumbling run. We plunged into the relative darkness of the garage. I slammed the door to the kitchen shut, muffling the roar, and fumbled for the button on the wall. The garage door groaned, starting its slow, agonizing ascent, revealing not a familiar driveway, but a swirling nightmare of smoke and ash. The world I knew was gone. All that was left was Leo, his map, and a road that no one else remembered. The garage door reached the top of its track with a final, shuddering clank. The heat was a solid wall, pressing in, stealing the air from my lungs. The smoke was a living thing, a roiling gray monster that blotted out the stars, the moon, everything but the terrifying orange glow of our neighborhood being eaten alive. Embers, carried on the gale, swirled around the driveway like malevolent fireflies. My car, my sturdy, reliable SUV, was covered in a blanket of gray ash, already hot to the touch. "Get in the back, Leo," I yelled over the roar. "Get Buddy in." Getting the dog into the car was a nightmare. He fought me, his old muscles rigid with terror. The asphalt was hot through the thin soles of my shoes. I could feel the radiant heat of the burning house next door scorching the side of my face. It was no good. He was too heavy, too scared. "I have an idea," Leo yelled. He scrambled into the back seat, then leaned over and opened the opposite door. "We'll make a ramp." He grabbed the folded-up picnic blanket from the trunk storage. It wasn't a ramp, but it was a path, a bridge. I pulled and Leo coaxed, and somehow, between the two of us, we got Buddy to scramble and slide his way into the cargo area. He collapsed in a heap, panting, his fur already smelling of smoke. I slammed the hatch shut and threw myself into the driver's seat. Leo was beside me, the map spread over his lap, the dome light casting a pale, ghostly glow on the old paper. I jammed the key in the ignition, and the engine roared to life. The air conditioning blasted on, circulating the hot, smoky air, but it was better than the inferno outside. I slammed the car into reverse, my foot trembling on the accelerator. I backed out into the cul-de-sac. It was a scene from a disaster movie. The Hendersons' house was a raging pyre. Another house across the street was going up, the flames licking out of the windows like hungry tongues. A burning palm tree crashed into the street just ahead of us, blocking the way I'd come. I swerved around it, the tires crunching over charred debris. "Left, Mom," Leo commanded, his voice steady. "At the end of the street, go left." We reached the intersection. To the right was Oak Ridge Drive, the main road, our designated evacuation route. It was exactly as Leo had predicted, a parking lot of red taillights disappearing into a solid wall of smoke and flame. A sheriff's car, lights flashing uselessly, was skewed sideways, abandoned. It wasn't a road anymore. It was a tomb. To the left was a narrow, paved lane I'd only ever noticed in passing. It led up a short, steep hill toward the water tower. It looked like it led to nothing. "Leo, are you sure?" I whispered, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. This was it, the choice. The world of order and signs and paved roads, or the world of my son's 100-year-old map. As if to answer, a sound like a cannon shot split the air. One of the ancient oaks that gave our development its name, its core hollowed out by the heat, gave a final, groaning sigh and collapsed directly across Oak Ridge Drive. It fell in a shower of sparks and exploding branches, sealing the road completely. There was no more choice. The modern world had just erased its own exit. "Go, Mom," Leo urged, pointing left. "The service lane turns into Pine Mill Road just over the hill. You'll see." I stomped on the accelerator. The SUV fishtailed on the ash-strewn asphalt as I wrenched the wheel to the left, away from the gridlock, away from the burning homes, and into the darkness. The paved lane was short, ending abruptly at a rusted chain-link fence with a faded, barely legible sign, "Danger, no trespassing, Municipal Water Authority." Beyond it was nothing but a dirt track, disappearing into the choking smoke and the black silhouettes of the hills. This was his road, a forgotten track behind a locked gate. My heart hammered against my ribs. This was insane. But behind us, the world was fire, and in front of us, my son was offering the only other option that existed. I didn't even hesitate. I backed up, aimed the heavy steel bumper of the SUV at the gate's rusty lock, and hit the gas. The SUV slammed into the gate with a screech of tortured metal and the sharp snap of the rusted chain. The fence crumpled like foil, the no trespassing sign spinning away into the smoky darkness. We were through. The tires spun for a moment on loose dirt before finding purchase, and I pushed us forward, into the unknown. The paved world was gone. This wasn't a road, it was a memory of one. 2 dirt ruts, overgrown with weeds, snaked into the blackness. The headlights bored a frantic, bouncing tunnel through the smoke, illuminating a claustrophobic corridor of skeletal manzanita and ghostly, ash-dusted shrubs. Behind us, the entire ridge where our home had been was silhouetted in a monstrous, pulsing orange. The fire was cresting the hill. It was hunting us. "It should follow the ridge for about a mile," Leo said, his voice shockingly calm. He had the map angled toward the dashboard lights, his finger tracing the faint line. "Then it'll dip down into the canyon, keep the steepest part of the hill on our left." My knuckles were bone white on the steering wheel. Every rational thought screamed that this was suicide. We were driving into the wilderness, guided by a century-old piece of paper, with an apocalypse at our back. The SUV bucked and lurched over rocks I couldn't see in time to avoid. A low-hanging branch scraped violently along the roof, making me cry out. Buddy whined in the back, a low, miserable sound. "Leo, I can't see anything," I said, my voice thin with terror. "What if the road is washed out? What if it just ends?" "It won't," he said, with a certainty that defied the chaos. "The cartographer who made this, his name was Thaddeus Ross. He was a surveyor for the railroad. He never mapped a dead end. He was too good." He looked up from the paper, his eyes scanning the bouncing, hellish landscape outside his window. "There, Mom, stop." I slammed on the brakes, sending us skidding in the loose dirt. "What? What is it?" He pointed into the darkness to our right. "Look." My headlights cut across a gully, and there, almost completely hidden by overgrown brush, was a low, crumbling wall of stacked, moss-covered stones. It was maybe 20 feet long, ending in a pile of rubble. It was nothing, a ruin. "It's the old sheepfold," Leo whispered, his voice full of a breathtaking reverence. He jabbed his finger at a tiny square on the map. "See? It's marked right here. We're on the right path. We just have to follow the gully down." I stared from the crumbling wall to the little ink square on the ancient map, and then to my son. He hadn't just seen a road. He had seen the world beneath the world. He was reading the ghost of the landscape, and it was speaking back to him. The profound, chilling abandonment I'd felt from the 911 call was replaced by a fierce, surging wave of awe. He was right. He had been right about everything. I took a deep, shuddering breath that was more soot than air. "Okay, Professor Dusty," I said, the old, teasing nickname turning into a title of the deepest respect. "Which way now?" He smiled, a quick, brilliant flash in the dark. "Just follow the stones," he said. "It'll take us all the way down." I turned the wheel, and the SUV dipped into the gully, following the line of the forgotten wall. We were driving on a road that no longer existed, guided by the ghost of a long-dead cartographer and the fierce, beautiful, unique mind of my son. And for the first time since I saw the smoke, I felt a flicker of something that wasn't terror. It was hope. The gully was a bone-jarring, teeth-rattling descent into hell's basement. Branches, sharp as claws, screeched against the car's metal skin. Rocks, unseen in the thick smoke, slammed against the undercarriage with sickening thuds. Every lurch and shudder of the SUV sent a fresh spike of fear through me, but I didn't slow down. My entire world had contracted to this bouncing tunnel of light, the white-knuckled grip on the steering wheel, and the calm, steady voice of my son. He was my compass, my North Star, and all I had to do was follow. We drove for what felt like an eternity, the orange glow of our burning world slowly receding in the rearview mirror, replaced by the suffocating blackness of the canyon. Then, through the smoke, I saw it, a flat, dark line cutting across our path. Pavement. The tires hit the asphalt of the old highway with a smooth hiss that sounded deafeningly loud after the chaos of the dirt track. I pulled over, slammed the car into park, and just stopped. My hands, locked in a death grip on the wheel, began to tremble uncontrollably. The adrenaline that had held me together, that had turned me into a machine of pure survival, was gone. In its place, a tidal wave of everything I had been holding back crashed over me. I dropped my forehead against the steering wheel and a sound tore out of my throat, a raw, guttural sob that was part grief, part terror, part overwhelming, gut-wrenching relief. We were out. We were alive. Buddy whined and pushed his wet nose against the back of my seat. Leo, my brave, brilliant boy, just sat quietly, his hand resting on the dashboard, giving me the space to brake. Our house was gone. Our street was gone. Mr. Henderson, I couldn't let my mind finish the thought. Everything we owned, everything familiar, was a cloud of ash drifting on the wind. But my son was here. My dog was here. We were here. After a minute, I lifted my head, wiping my eyes with the back of my filthy hand. My gaze fell on the map, still illuminated on Leo's lap. It was more than a map. It was a promise. It was the language of survival. I put the car in drive and pulled onto the highway, driving slowly, my headlights cutting through the thinning smoke. A few miles down the road, the darkness was pierced by the strobing red and blue of emergency lights. A roadblock. A sheriff's deputy, his face smudged with soot and exhaustion, stepped into the beam of our headlights, holding up his hand. He looked stunned to see a vehicle coming from this direction, from the heart of the fire. I rolled down the window, and the cool, clean air that rushed in was a miracle. "Ma'am, this road is closed," he said, his voice hoarse. "Where in God's name did you come from?" "Oak Ridge Estates," I said, my voice cracking. We came through the canyon." He frowned, his eyes narrowing in disbelief. "That's impossible. There's no road through there, not for 20 years. "There is," I insisted, a new, fierce energy rising in me. This wasn't just my story anymore. The 911 dispatcher told me to shelter in place. She said Oak Ridge Drive was the only way out. She was wrong. People are trapped up there. The main road is blocked by fire and a fallen tree. They're going to die if someone doesn't tell them. The deputy looked at me with a mixture of pity and suspicion, as if I were hysterical. "Ma'am, we have the situation under control. My maps show." "Your maps are wrong," I interrupted, my voice rising. I turned to Leo. "Show him." Leo leaned across me, holding out the old, sepia-toned paper. "It's Pine Mill Road," he said, his voice clear and steady. His small, graphite-smudged finger pointed to the spidery line. "It starts at the service lane by the water tower. The gate is rusted, but you can break the chain. It follows the gully past an old sheepfold and comes out right here. It's overgrown, but it's passable." The deputy stared, his flashlight beam moving from the ancient map to Leo's earnest face and back again. He saw the crumbling stone wall and the forgotten lumber mill in my son's eyes. He saw the truth. He keyed the radio on his shoulder. "Dispatch, this is Unit 7 Adam 12 at the old highway roadblock," he said, his voice tight with a newfound urgency. "I have a civilian vehicle here that just came out of the fire zone via an old service track. Repeat, they found an alternate route out of Oak Ridge. Get me the incident commander, now." We ended up in a high school gymnasium that smelled of sweat, disinfectant, and sorrow. The Red Cross gave us blankets, toothbrushes, and watery coffee. People shuffled around like ghosts, their faces blank with shock, telling the same fragmented story of smoke and sirens. They told us that, thanks to the deputy's call, fire crews had been redirected. They'd used Leo's road to get behind the fire line, saving dozens of families who had been trapped in the gridlock just as he'd predicted. My son was a hero. The thought brought no comfort, only a cold, heavy weight. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford. Every time I closed my eyes, I was back in the car, the SUV bucking through the dark, the world behind us a roaring furnace. I'd wake up with a gasp, my heart hammering, the phantom smell of burning plastic and pine needles in my nostrils. During the day, any loud noise made me jump. The screech of a chair leg on the linoleum floor was the shriek of twisting metal. The rattling of the gymnasium's air vents was the Santa Ana wind clawing at our windows. I was afraid nerve-ending, constantly bracing for an impact that had already happened. But my fear was a noisy, frantic thing. Leo's was silent. He hadn't touched the small roll of maps I'd managed to grab. They stayed at the bottom of our bag, a forgotten treasure. He sat on his cot, picking at a loose thread on his blanket, his face pale and still. His old, scholarly quiet had been replaced by a dense, empty stillness. He looked hollowed out. On the third day, my sister Carol found us. She hugged me so tight, I thought my ribs would crack, her own face streaked with tears and ash from her volunteer vest. "I was so scared," she sobbed. "They're calling him the Map Kid on the news. They're saying he's a hero." Later, when Carol was off getting us food, I sat down on the cot next to Leo. I pulled the 1902 map from my bag. It was the only one that mattered. Its edges were brown and curled from the heat in the car, and it smelled faintly of our burning world. I unrolled it carefully, a sacred text. "Leo," I said softly, "Carol said you're a hero." I held it out for him to see, for him to touch. I thought seeing it, holding the proof of what he'd done, would bring back the light to his eyes. I thought he would feel the pride I couldn't quite let myself feel. Instead, he flinched back, scrambling to the far edge of the cot as if I'd shown him a venomous snake. His breath hitched. "Put it away," he whispered, his voice trembling. "Leo, honey, this is the map. This is how you saved us. You were so brave." "No," he said, shaking his head, his eyes screwed shut. "I don't want to see it. When I look at the lines, they're not roads anymore. They're on fire. I can see it. I see the fire tracing the road, Mom. It's chasing us." My blood ran cold. I quickly rolled up the map, my hands shaking. His gift, his beautiful, strange language for seeing through time, had been corrupted. The communion he'd felt with Thaddeus Ross, the long-dead cartographer, was now a shared nightmare. His passion wasn't a window into history anymore. It was a window into horror. I suddenly found myself wishing he loved YouTubers. I wished he wanted a new video game. I wished for the shallow, fleeting joys I had once scorned, because they were safe. They didn't have a body count. His obsession had become too real, its consequences too absolute. We had survived, but I had a terrible feeling that the fire had taken my son anyway, leaving this haunted stranger in his place. For a week, the world was the color of ash. We stayed with Carol, sleeping on her couch and in her spare room, breathing air that wasn't choked with smoke, but still felt thin and empty. The news played on a loop, a litany of scorched acreage and containment percentages. They called it the Oak Ridge Fire. They showed aerial shots of my cul-de-sac, a grid of blackened foundations and skeletal cars. They showed the line where the fire had stopped, right at the edge of the canyon. They praised the heroic efforts of the firefighters who had used an unlisted access road to flank the blaze. They never said my son's name, but they used his road. My hero, meanwhile, sat by the window, staring at Carol's perfectly green, unburnt lawn. He refused to look at a screen, refused to read a book. He just stared. I tried to talk to him, to coax him out, but his silence was a fortress. The fire had burned away his language, and I didn't know how to give it back. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. Carol was reading from the local paper online. "They're holding a community meeting tomorrow," she said softly. "The County Board of Supervisors and the Office of Emergency Services to review the response." She hesitated. The director, a man named Wallace, is quoted as saying the evacuation was a textbook success with minimal loss of life. Minimal. The word landed like a punch to the gut. Mr. Henderson was minimal. The Garzas, 2 cats, who hadn't made it out, were minimal. My son's soul was minimal. A cold, clear rage, purer than any emotion I had felt since the fire, solidified in my chest. "We're going," I said. The words came out like chips of ice. Carol looked at me, her eyes wide. "Are you sure? Is that a good idea?" "They're not going to call a death sentence a textbook success," I said. I went to my bag and pulled out the rolled-up map. It felt warm in my hand, like it still held the heat of that night. They need to see the textbook they were using. The meeting was held in the same high school gym where we'd first found shelter. This time it was filled with folding chairs and a podium. Director Wallace was a man with a tidy suit and a practiced, calming voice. He spoke of interagency cooperation and rapid deployment. He clicked through a PowerPoint presentation with bright green lines showing the official evacuation routes. When the map of Oak Ridge Estates came up, I saw it, the single fat green arrow pointing down Oak Ridge Drive. My heart hammered against my ribs. I stood up. Carol's hand shot out and gripped my arm, but I shook it off. "Excuse me," I said. My voice was louder than I intended, cutting through the sterile room. Wallace paused, blinking in the stage lights. "My name is not important. I was a resident of Oak Ridge Estates. I was told that route was a success." "It was, ma'am," Wallace said, his professional smile not wavering. "We evacuated over 95% of the affected area in under an hour." "On the night of the fire," I continued, my voice shaking but gaining strength, "I called 911. I told the dispatcher that Oak Ridge Drive was blocked by fire, that my neighbor's house had exploded, that we were trapped. She told me, and I quote, 'That is the official route.' Then she told me to shelter in place." Was that part of the textbook success, Director? Telling us to sit in our wooden houses and burn to death? A murmur went through the crowd. Wallace's smile faltered. "We are reviewing all operator calls. In a dynamic situation." "It was not a dynamic situation for your dispatcher." I shot back, taking a step into the aisle. It was a script. And when reality didn't fit the script, the answer was to let us die. I held up the map. The scorched edges were stark against my pale, trembling fingers. "This is a map of our county from 1902. This is what saved us. This is what saved the dozens of people your textbook left stranded in a gridlock of fire." It was drawn by a man named Thaddeus Ross. His map had options. His map had reality in it. Yours just has a green arrow. I walked to the front and slapped the old paper down on the podium. "My 11-year-old son found this road. My son, not your multi-million-dollar system. He's a hero, but you broke him. He can't look at a map anymore without seeing fire. So you will not call this a success. You will call it a failure. And you will tell us, all of us, how you are going to add the real world to your maps, so that the next time the voice on the phone doesn't tell a mother to hold her child and wait for the fire." The room was dead silent. Director Wallace stared from the ancient map to my face, and for the first time, the politician was gone. He looked like a man who had just understood the true cost. He leaned into the microphone, his voice stripped of its earlier confidence. "You're right," he said, his voice hoarse. "We failed. Effective immediately, we are scrapping our static mapping system. We will create a new protocol, a Thaddeus Ross protocol, to integrate civilian-verified alternate routes in real time. We failed your son, and I am profoundly sorry." 3 months later, the rains came. They were soft at first, a gentle washing that turned the gray ash on Carol's windows into muddy tears. We were living in a beige rental apartment that smelled of new carpet and paint, a sterile box where nothing was ours. Our lives had become a series of appointments with the insurance adjuster, whose sympathy felt as thin as his polyester tie, with FEMA officials who gave us pamphlets and phone numbers that led nowhere, and with Dr. Anya Sharma, a therapist whose quiet office was the only place I felt I could breathe. Our weekly sessions became an anchor in the unmoored weeks. I learned to name the beast, the hypervigilance that made me map fire exits in the grocery store, the nightmares that left me clawing at phantom smoke. Leo, however, remained a fortress of silence. He'd sit on Dr. Sharma's 2-plush couch, tracing the patterns on the rug with his shoe, offering only one-word answers. The Thaddeus Ross protocol was a real thing now, a minor news item about emergency services reform, but the boy who inspired it had lost his own language. One Saturday, I knew I couldn't stand the beige walls for another second. "We're going for a drive," I announced. Leo didn't look up from the window where he'd been watching the rain. Carol, who had brought over a casserole that tasted like home, gave me a worried look. "Are you sure where you're going?" she asked gently. "Yes," I said, my voice firmer than I felt. "We're going to see our land." The drive up was surreal. New growth, a vibrant, almost violent green, was already pushing up through the blackened soil. When we reached our cul-de-sac, I parked where the Hendersons' driveway used to be. There were no houses, just concrete slabs, skeletal chimneys, and the warped metal husks of cars. It was a graveyard. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. Leo followed, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. We walked onto the foundation of our house, a bare stage where our lives had played out. I stood where the kitchen window had been, looking out at the golden hills, now scarred with black but still standing. Leo walked to the edge of the slab, to the spot where our dining room table had been. He wasn't looking at the ruin, though. He was looking past it, toward the top of the hill where the water tower stood, and the faint line of the dirt track that disappeared into the canyon. His road. I saw his shoulders relax, just a fraction. He was seeing the land, not the loss. He was seeing the shape of the world that he understood. The next day, I went to an art supply store. I didn't buy an antique map. I bought a heavy, leather-bound book of blank cream-colored paper and a tin of finely sharpened colored pencils. That evening, I sat on the floor of the beige apartment next to Leo and placed the book in his lap. I didn't say anything. He opened it, the smell of fresh paper and cedar filling the space between us. He ran his hand over the blank page. For a long time, he just sat there. Buddy, old and ever-present, rested his graying head on Leo's knee. Then, my son picked up a soft gray pencil. He didn't draw the old roads. He drew the outline of our foundation. He drew the ghostly shape of the cul-de-sac. Then, with a dark brown pencil, he drew the 2 ruts of Pine Mill Road, snaking away into the hills. He looked at it, his focus sharp and clear for the first time in months. He glanced up at me, a flicker of the old light in his eyes. "We have to map what's here now," he said, his voice quiet but steady, "and we have to map where we're going next." He picked up a green pencil, and, next to the blackened scar of the hills, he began to draw the first, tentative shoots of new life. He didn't just draw that one map. The blank book became his new world. He filled it, not with copies of old surveys, but with a new kind of cartography. He mapped the things no one else thought to record. He drew the path the deer took through the burn scar to a creek that had started running again. He mapped the locations of surviving oak trees, marking them like ancient monuments. He charted the progress of the community garden that sprang up in the park, with tiny, detailed squares for the tomato beds and the squash patch. He was no longer tracing the past. He was documenting resilience. Last week, Carol brought over a flyer for a town hall meeting. Not another one with officials in suits, but a community-led one about the future. "Rebuilding Oak Ridge," it said. On the flyer was a crude, photocopied map of the area with proposed zones for parks and new housing. Leo looked at it for a long moment, then went and got his book. He opened it to a fresh page. "Their scale is wrong," he said, the first unsolicited, critical thought he'd offered about a map in months, and they didn't account for the new water runoff from the north slope. He spent the next 2 hours at Carol's kitchen table, surrounded by his colored pencils. He wasn't tracing a ghost. He was architecting a future. He drew a new plan, one that worked with the changed land, not against it. He designed a green belt that followed the natural drainage, creating a fire break that was also a park. He re-sited the proposed playground to a spot sheltered by a surviving stand of pines. When he was done, he looked not at me, but at Carol. "Could you take this to the meeting?" he asked. I think Thaddeus Ross would have done it this way." Carol took the map, her eyes shining with a kind of awe I knew well. She looked at me over Leo's head, and in that look was an apology for every time she'd called his passion weird, and a promise that she would never make that mistake again. I see him now, asleep on the couch with Buddy's head on his feet, the open book of maps on his chest. We are safe. We are scarred, and we are changed, but we are charting a way forward. The world is full of official maps, the ones with bold, green arrows that tell you the one and only way to go. They're clean and simple, and sometimes they're catastrophically wrong. Leo taught me that the most important maps are the ones we draw ourselves, the ones that account for the gullies and the ruins, the scars and the unexpected new growth. They're messy and complicated and deeply personal. They're the maps that show us not just where we were, but who we are becoming. It's a story I had to tell, and if you followed our path to the end and found something of your own journey in it, hitting that like button lets me know we're not alone. Subscribe to the channel, and we'll see what other forgotten roads we can find together.